A woman walked in and asked if the aisle that forgets had taken anyone tonight. The bell above the door didn't ring when she entered. It never failed, not even on nights when the wind pressed hard enough to bow the glass. But she was already inside, standing just past the threshold like she'd been there longer than the store itself. I was halfway through restocking the cigarette shelf, counting packs by muscle memory. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, a constant electric whine that settled into the bones after a few hours. I didn't turn around right away. People said strange things at 2 in the morning. It was part of the job. "What aisle?" I asked, sliding another carton into place. "The one that forgets," she said. Her voice didn't echo the way it should have. The store always had a faint hollowness to it at night, like every sound had too much room to stretch. But her words landed close, tight, as if they'd been spoken right beside my ear. I turned then. She looked ordinary in the way that made it harder to hold onto details. Dark coat, damp at the shoulders like she'd come in from mist. Hair pulled back, though I couldn't tell if it was tied or just tucked behind her ears. Her face, there was nothing wrong with it, not exactly. Just the sense that if I looked away, I wouldn't remember how to describe it. "We don't have anything like that," I said. "Aisles are numbered. That's it." She nodded once, like I'd confirmed something for her. Her gaze drifted past me, down the long rows of shelves. Canned goods, cleaning supplies, snacks, everything in its place, labels facing forward, neat and predictable. Except, I blinked. "How many aisles do we have?" she asked. 8, I said automatically. She tilted her head. "Are you sure?" I opened my mouth, then stopped. 8. I said it without thinking. But when I pictured the layout, produce coolers along the back wall, freezer cases to the left, the narrow corridor of stockroom shelves behind the swinging door, I could only place 7. "That's what the system says," I added, gesturing vaguely toward the register. "The system forgets too," she said. The lights flickered once. Just a stutter. The hum dipped and returned. I laughed under my breath, more out of habit than humor. "Look, if you're trying to find something, just tell me what it is." She stepped closer. Not aggressively, not even urgently, just enough that I had to shift my weight back. "I'm trying to find someone," she said. "He came in about an hour ago. Tall, gray jacket. He wouldn't have stayed long." "Did you check outside?" I asked. "Sometimes people just—" "He called me," she interrupted. "From inside the store." The words settled wrong. I glanced toward the front windows. Black glass, my reflection faintly visible against the dark, stretched thin by the interior light. No movement outside. No parked cars I didn't recognize. "What did he say?" I asked. Her eyes moved again, scanning the aisles. "He said he couldn't find the end of it." Something cold slipped into the space between my ribs. "Aisle 3 runs longest," I said, too quickly. "Canned goods. It goes back pretty far, but—" "Show me," she said. I hesitated. There was no reason to, just a customer asking for help. But the store felt different now. Not larger exactly, just misaligned. Like the shelves weren't sitting where they had been a moment ago. I set the carton down and walked past her, toward the center of the store. My shoes made soft, hollow sounds against the tile. The hum of the lights seemed louder here, layered with something else. A faint, irregular clicking, like a misfiring bulb. "Aisle 3, I said, stopping at the end cap stacked with discounted soup cans. She didn't come up beside me. I could feel her a few steps behind, her presence fixed like a weight. I stepped into the aisle. It looked normal at first. Metal shelves evenly spaced. Rows of cans, labels turned outward in tidy lines. The faint smell of processed food and dust. But the far end, it seemed farther than it should have been. The back wall wasn't visible, just a dim narrowing where the lights didn't quite reach. "We close at 5, I said, though I wasn't sure why. "He wouldn't have stayed." "Walk," she said. I moved forward. The first few steps felt the same as always. Then the sounds shifted. The hum overhead stretched thin, as if it were being pulled away from me. My footsteps dulled, losing their echo. Even my breathing felt quieter, like it was happening somewhere slightly behind me. I glanced back. The entrance to the aisle was still there. The woman stood at its mouth, her shape small, distant. Too distant. "How long is this aisle?" I called. She didn't answer. I took another step, then another. The shelves on either side seemed to drift closer, not enough to touch, but enough to narrow the space. The labels blurred when I tried to read them, letters sliding out of place. I reached for a can, just to ground myself, and found my hand hesitating halfway. What had I been reaching for? I lowered it slowly. "Hello," I called again. My voice didn't carry, fell short, swallowed by the aisle. Something clicked overhead. A light flickered out. The dim stretch ahead deepened. I turned to go back. The entrance was gone. Not completely. There was still an opening behind me, but it didn't look like the store anymore. The light there was wrong, too pale, too flat. And the woman, I couldn't see her. I couldn't remember exactly where she'd been standing. A pressure built behind my eyes, dull and insistent. Why had I come down here? I looked at the shelves again. Cans. Just cans. Labels I couldn't read. Rows that seemed to repeat, the same dented corner, the same misaligned sticker over and over. A shape moved ahead. I froze. It wasn't fast. Just a shift in the darkness, something resolving into the outline of a person. Tall, shoulders slightly hunched. "Hey!" I said, relief rising too quickly. "Stores closing soon." The figure turned. I couldn't see his face. Not because it was dark, but because there was nothing to fix on. My eyes slid off it, refusing to hold the details. "You found the end?" I asked. He didn't answer. He took a step toward me. The air grew colder. Another light flickered out behind him. Then another. The aisle contracted, the darkness pressing closer, guiding him forward. I stepped back instinctively. My heel caught on something. I stumbled, catching myself against the shelf. Cans rattled, the sound sharp and wrong, like breaking glass. The figure kept coming. And as he did, something inside me loosened. A name. There had been a name in my head. Mine maybe, or his. It slipped, unraveling, the letters coming apart before I could hold them. "Wait," I said, though I wasn't sure what I was asking for. He was close enough now that I could see his jacket. Gray, damp at the shoulders. The woman's voice surfaced in my mind, distant and thin. He wouldn't have stayed long. I turned and ran. The aisle stretched ahead of me, longer than it had been before. The shelves blurred past, repeating, looping. The hum of the lights fractured into uneven pulses. I could feel something behind me. Not footsteps, not breath, just the steady absence of space, closing in. I ran until my lungs burned, until the floor shifted under my feet, until the aisle ended. I stumbled out into the store, catching myself against the end cap. The fluorescent lights blazed overhead, too bright, too loud. The hum slammed back into place, filling my ears. Everything looked normal. 7 aisles. I could see them all from here. The woman stood by the register. She watched me without surprise. "Did it take him?" she asked. I opened my mouth. There was something I was supposed to say, something important, but all I could think about was the empty space in my chest, where something had been a moment ago. I don't remember," I said. She nodded. "That's how it feeds," she said softly. I looked back at aisle 3. It looked shorter now, perfectly ordinary. The back wall visible again, lined with stacked boxes. "How do we stop it?" I asked. She gave a small, almost pitying smile. "You don't," she said. "You just leave before it learns your name." A chill ran through me. "What's my name?" I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. Her expression changed, just slightly. "You don't know?" she asked. I shook my head. The hum of the lights filled the silence. She stepped back toward the door. "I'm sorry," she said. The bell rang as she left. Clear. Normal. I stood there for a long time, staring at the aisles, trying to fix them in my mind. 7. There were 7. I was sure of it. And yet, at the edge of my vision, something shifted. A narrow gap between shelves that hadn't been there before. Waiting. I turned away quickly, forcing my attention to the register, the cigarettes, the small, manageable tasks I could still understand. But even as I worked, something kept slipping. A memory, a detail, a piece of myself I couldn't quite name. And somewhere behind me, quiet and patient, the aisle that forgets began to grow again, just long enough to fit one more person who couldn't remember why they were running. The store's freezer fog spelled out coordinates I've never seen. I noticed it while I was counting inventory in the frozen aisle, the numbers settling into the glass as if the cold had learned how to write. At first I thought it was just the usual condensation, uneven patches blooming and fading where the seals didn't quite hold, but the shapes were too precise. Straight lines, clean breaks, a pattern that didn't smear when the compressor kicked on. I leaned closer, breath held so I wouldn't disturb it. 41.7. The rest blurred, reforming even as I watched. The digits didn't bead or drip. They held, crisp as printed ink, hovering in the thin frost that filmed the inside of the door. The hum of the lights overhead felt louder here, layered with the low, cyclical thrum of the freezer units. A faint vibration traveled through the floor, up through my shoes, into my bones. I'd been working nights long enough to tune it out, but now every sound seemed deliberate, timed to the slow appearance of those numbers. I wiped the glass with my sleeve. The cold bit through the fabric instantly, sharp enough to make my fingers ache. The numbers vanished beneath the smear of warmth, then reappeared, exactly where they'd been, as if I'd never touched them. 41.7298. I stepped back. Great, I muttered, though there was no one to hear it. Faulty seal or something. The store was empty. It always was at this hour, somewhere between 2 and 3, when even the late-night regulars stopped coming in. The fluorescent lights flickered at the edges, a faint stutter you could only see if you looked directly at them. The aisles stretched long and quiet, shelves packed with things no one needed urgently enough to buy in the middle of the night. I turned away from the freezer. I could log it, I thought. Maintenance issue. Weird condensation pattern. Someone would come in during the day and deal with it. But the numbers stayed in my head. 41.7298. I'd seen the start clearly. The rest had been shifting, but there'd been a comma. A second set. Coordinates. I didn't know why that thought came first, but once it did, it settled in place, firm and certain. I went back. The glass was clear again for a moment, just the faint fog blooming and fading with the compressor cycle. Then, slowly, as if drawn from the cold itself, the digits returned. 41.7298. The second number formed more slowly. The minus sign appeared first, hanging alone for a second too long. Then the rest followed in a sequence that felt intentional. Minus 128.4. I pulled my phone from my pocket, hands clumsy with the cold. The screen lit up harshly in the dim aisle. I opened the Maps app, typed in what I could remember. No results. I adjusted the numbers, filling in the gaps as best I could. The app hesitated, then dropped a pin somewhere in open ocean. No landmass, no nearby markers, just a flat expanse of blue. That's not right, I said quietly. My voice sounded wrong in the aisle. Thinner than it should have been, like it had less space to move. Behind me, one of the lights flickered hard, then steadied. I glanced back. The store was still empty. The front doors reflected the interior in a faint, warped mirror. No movement, no cars pulling in. When I turned back, the numbers had changed. 41.7301. Minus 128.41. A small shift, not random, incremental. I stared at them. That's not. I began, then stopped. The hum of the freezer deepened. A low, steady note that seemed to press against my chest. The glass fogged more heavily now, the numbers thickening, their edges sharper. They were updating. I checked the time on my phone. 2:17 a.m. I waited. At 2:18, the numbers shifted again. 41.7304 minus 128.41. Pattern. Slow, deliberate movement, like something tracking. A coldness settled in my stomach that had nothing to do with the freezer. I took a step back, then another. The air outside the aisle felt warmer, but not enough. The chill clung to me, seeping through my clothes. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling. Just numbers, I said, trying to anchor myself. Just condensation. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Not from the front of the store. Not from behind me. From the glass. I turned away sharply and headed for the register. The motion sensors near the front doors flickered as I passed, the lights adjusting a fraction too late. Everything lagged by half a second, like the store was struggling to keep up. I set my phone on the counter, tried to focus on something normal. The receipt printer, the lottery display, the rows of gum and candy bars. My name tag caught the edge of my vision. I looked down. The letters seemed off. Not missing exactly, just harder to hold on to. I blinked, and they snapped back into clarity. "Get it together," I said under my breath. The clock above the register ticked forward. 2:19. I didn't want to go back. But I did. The aisle felt longer this time. Not by much. Just enough that the walk took a second longer than it should have. The hum grew louder with each step. The air colder, sharper. The numbers were already there. 41.7310 minus 128.41. Faster now. I swallowed. "What are you tracking?" I asked the empty aisle. The fog shifted. For a moment, the numbers blurred, the digits dissolving into something less structured. Lines, curves, shapes that almost looked like letters but not in any alphabet I recognized. Then they snapped back into place. 41.7313 minus 128.41. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I flinched, nearly dropping it as I pulled it out. No notification, just the screen lighting up on its own. The map app was open. The pin had moved, not across the ocean. Inland. The blue had been replaced by gray. A blank expanse with no roads, no labels. Just a small red marker, pulsing faintly. I hadn't typed anything new. The coordinates on the screen matched the glass. 41.7313 minus 128.41. A faint sound came from the freezer. Not the hum. Something softer. A slow, rhythmic tapping like fingernails against glass. I froze. The tapping came again. 3 quick taps, then silence. "Hello," I said before I could stop myself. The fog thickened. For a moment, the numbers distorted, stretching vertically, the digits elongating into thin, pale lines. Then, between them, something pressed against the glass from the inside. A shape, not a hand. Not exactly. Too long. Too many joints. The outline shifted as if it couldn't decide how many fingers it should have. I stumbled back, heart hammering. The shape withdrew instantly, the glass clearing just enough to leave the numbers intact. 41.7318 minus 128.41. The tapping stopped. The hum returned to its steady, suffocating drone. I couldn't breathe properly. Each inhale felt shallow, incomplete. "It's just a reflection," I whispered. "Just something behind me." I turned. The aisle behind me was empty, but it looked wrong. The shelves didn't line up the way they should have. The end cap seemed farther away. The lights overhead flickered in a staggered pattern, creating brief pockets of shadow that lingered too long. I looked back at the freezer. The numbers changed again. 41.7322 minus 128.41. My phone vibrated harder this time, a continuous buzz. I didn't want to look. I did anyway. The map had zoomed in. The gray expanse wasn't empty anymore. It was textured, faint lines emerging where there should have been none. Not roads, not terrain, paths. Thin, branching lines that converged on the red marker. On me. I felt it then. Not just being watched, but being located. Fixed in place by something that understood distance in a way I didn't. The cold intensified, biting through my clothes, my skin, settling deep in my chest. The glass fogged completely. For a moment, there were no numbers, just white. Then, slowly, the condensation parted. New coordinates formed. Not distant, not abstract. Close, precise. Aligned with the store. Aligned with me. The first number was familiar. The latitude matched the city. The second shifted once, twice, then locked. A decimal point flickered, adjusted, refined. Closer, closer. I backed away, but the numbers kept updating, each change narrowing the distance between the place on the glass and the place I stood. My phone screen cracked with a sharp, sudden sound. A thin fracture ran across the map, distorting the red marker. But it didn't disappear. Pulsed brighter. The tapping returned. Louder now. From inside the freezer. No, from the glass itself. I pressed my back against the opposite shelf, the metal cold even through my jacket. "I'm here," I said, though I didn't know why. "You found me." The tapping stopped. The hum cut out. For a single, stretched second, the entire store fell silent. Then the lights flickered. And in that brief stutter of darkness, the numbers on the glass changed one last time. When the lights came back, the fog had cleared. The glass was empty. The cold receded, leaving only the normal chill of the aisle. My phone screen went dark. The map was gone. Everything was as it should be. I stood there for a long time, listening to the steady return of the hum, the flicker of the lights settling into their usual rhythm. Eventually, I went back to the register. I didn't look at the freezer again. I didn't think about the numbers. There was no reason to. The store was quiet, empty, normal. And yet, every few minutes, my phone would light up in my pocket, just long enough to show a set of coordinates updating by fractions, narrowing in on a place I no longer remembered leaving.